The price of family loyalty, a tale of deception and redemption. Alex's phone buzzed incessantly. 13 missed calls. 27 unread messages. The screen flashed once more, a constant reminder that something was wrong. It wasn't even 6 a.m. yet. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach as he stared at the notifications piling up. This was it, the moment everything had been building to. He felt it in his bones, the quiet, creeping anxiety that had been lurking for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Standing in his kitchen, the familiar hum of the coffee maker doing its slow, rhythmic drip, Alex couldn't help but wonder how everything had spiraled so far out of control. What had started as a simple, well-meaning offer to help family had grown into something far more complicated. And now here he was, wondering if this was the moment his life was about to change forever. He thought about the phone calls, the ones from his brother, Nate, and his wife, Emma, how they had been relentless these past few days. How they had started just like any other, a request for help, a few weeks of shelter, a temporary fix for their uncertain living situation. He'd opened his door to them in good faith, thinking it would be fine. Just a few weeks. A small favor, nothing more. But that was before the phone started ringing off the hook, before the house that had always been his personal sanctuary was filled with things that weren't his, before everything in his life had begun to feel different. Alex's hand hovered over the phone. He knew what was on the other side of those missed calls. He knew what was waiting for him at the other end of the line. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to answer. The first month wasn't terrible. Not at all. Nate and Emma kept their things neatly tucked away in the guest bedroom, and Nate spoke with enthusiasm about the promising job leads that were just around the corner. Emma, though a little scatterbrained in the kitchen, still made the effort to cook dinner a few times. It wasn't gourmet, but it was something. It seemed like a small sacrifice for family. What was the harm in letting them stay for a few weeks? Alex figured it would all work itself out. But by week 6, things started to change. Alex came home one evening to find his home office had been completely rearranged. His dual monitors were unplugged, his desk was shoved against the wrong wall, and his filing cabinet? It was sitting awkwardly in the hallway. As he stood there, blinking in disbelief, Nate appeared in the doorway, a sheepish grin on his face. "Hey bro, we were just rearranging the energy in here." "Feng shui," Nate explained, gesturing toward the cluttered room. "The vibe is all wrong, man. It'll be better this way." Alex could feel the frustration bubbling up inside him. His office, the one space in the house that was truly his, was now an afterthought. With a tight-lipped sigh, he spent the next 2 hours putting everything back where it belonged, all while Nate and Emma ordered takeout and sat in the living room, laughing. The job leads? Still non-existent. The promise of new opportunities was always just around the corner, but it never quite materialized. "The market's tough right now," Nate would say when Alex asked about the progress. It was the same response every time, a phrase that had started to feel like a dull echo. And yet, Nate continued to spend his days on his phone, while Emma kept buying more and more crystals and essential oils. Alex didn't know when it had happened, but the house had begun to resemble something more like a spiritual retreat than a home. Everywhere he looked, there were New Age decorations, weird scents filling the air, and strange little knickknacks in places they didn't belong. It wasn't just the clutter that bothered him, it was the intrusion. Little by little, they were claiming the space he had worked so hard to make his own. He'd been the one to invite them in, but now it was as if they had taken over, shifting things around like they owned the place. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left Alex questioning everything, let me connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for your own space or stood your ground for what's right, hit that like button because, trust me, this story is just getting started. Alex had been quiet for months, swallowing his frustration and letting the little things slide. But when he came home one evening, everything changed. The first thing he noticed was the hum of voices coming from the living room, voices that were not familiar. He stepped inside and his breath caught in his throat. There, in the middle of his living room, were at least a dozen strangers sitting cross-legged in a circle, surrounded by crystals, candles, and the thick scent of incense. Emma, of course, was at the center of it all, her eyes closed in some sort of meditative trance. His favorite chair, the one he'd spent countless evenings sinking into after a long day, was shoved unceremoniously into the garage, out of the way to make room for the energy to flow. It looked like a scene from a low-budget spiritual retreat, not his home. The entire room felt foreign, as if the space he'd worked so hard to create had been invaded and transformed into something unrecognizable. His fists clenched at his sides. This was the last straw. "Emma." Alex's voice cut through the soft murmurs in the room. "What is going on here? What is this?" "My house." He couldn't believe the words were coming out of his mouth. The shock hit him like a freight train. Emma opened her eyes slowly, a serene smile spreading across her face like she'd just welcomed him into a sanctuary, not desecrated his home. "It's just a healing circle, Alex. We're helping people," she said, her voice soft and soothing as if everything were perfectly normal. "This is a safe space." "Safe space? You've got people in my living room, rearranging my things and turning my house into a spiritual center." Alex's anger simmered just beneath the surface. Nate, lounging lazily on the couch as if he owned the place, chimed in without even looking up from his phone. "Real men support family, Alex. You're being selfish. Don't be like that." There it was again, the phrase that had been used against him for months. Real men support family. For the first time, Alex saw it for what it truly was: manipulation. His brother wasn't looking for a place to stay anymore. Neither was Emma. They weren't here because they needed help, they were here because Alex had become a tool to be used, a stepping stone to build their little empire. The promise of family had been nothing more than a trap, and Alex had been too blind to see it until now. Emma's eyes glistened with fake tears as she added, "Don't be selfish, Alex. We're just trying to create something beautiful. Don't you want to help us?" Her voice was thick with a guilt trip so expertly played that for a split second, Alex almost faltered. Almost. But then the truth hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't about family. This wasn't about helping people. This was about taking advantage of him, draining him dry, and leaving him with nothing but empty promises and guilt. He'd been so caught up in the idea of family that he couldn't see how far they'd gone, how much they'd taken. The manipulation had been subtle at first, small, almost imperceptible acts of intrusion. But now it was glaring, impossible to ignore. For the first time in months, Alex didn't hesitate. He stood tall, his voice steady, but his words were firm. "I'm done. You need to leave. Now." The room went silent. The strangers exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure of what to do. Emma's smile faltered, but Nate only stared at him, his face unreadable. This was it, the moment that everything had been building to. Alex knew there was no turning back. "Before I go on with what happened next, trust me, you won't believe it. I want to hear from you, my incredible viewers. How many of you have ever been taken advantage of by someone you trusted? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever stood your ground when everything was on the line, hit that like button, because this is just the beginning of a fight for what's right." Alex stood in his living room, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a heavy stone. He had been quiet for so long, trying to make things work, trying to keep the peace. But something had snapped inside him when he saw how easily Nate and Emma manipulated him. The line had been crossed, and now it was time to take action. The next morning, Alex did what he had been avoiding for months. He called a lawyer. He spent hours researching tenant laws, understanding his rights, and making sure he wasn't overlooking anything. This was his home, his sanctuary, and it was time to reclaim it. He documented every conversation, every text, every instance of manipulation, and he was ready to act. But as soon as the clock hit 8 a.m., the phone rang. It was Nate, then Emma, then Nate again. Their voices, filled with desperation and guilt, flooded the line, trying to talk him out of what he had already decided. "Come on, Alex. Don't do this," Nate pleaded. "We're family. You can't just throw us out like this." Emma's voice cracked through the speaker, her tears almost tangible. "We don't have anywhere else to go. You're being so selfish. You know we've been struggling. Why can't you just help us a little longer?" She sounded so convincing, so hurt. It was the same manipulation, the same routine they had used time and time again. But this time, Alex wasn't moved. He had reached his breaking point. He wasn't going to be guilt-tripped into another month of living in a house that didn't feel like his anymore. The promises of just a little longer had become a lie, and Alex wasn't buying it anymore. He hung up the phone and walked to the kitchen. With steady hands, he wrote out a formal notice, the legal words flowing smoothly as if they had been waiting for this moment. 30 days. That was all they had. 30 days to pack up and leave his house, the home he had worked so hard to create. He sealed the envelope, grabbed his coat, and walked out the door. When Alex returned home, he didn't waste a second. He slapped the notice on the door, right where Nate and Emma would see it the moment they came home. The power of his decision surged through him as he walked away, feeling something he hadn't in months. Control. That night, the calls didn't stop. His phone buzzed relentlessly, the familiar numbers lighting up the screen over and over. Nate, Emma, his mother, too. All of them trying to manipulate him into reversing his decision. But Alex didn't flinch. He ignored the calls, the texts, and the pleas. For the first time, he was standing up for himself. Before I share how everything escalated, I want to hear from you, my amazing viewers. Have you ever had to make a tough decision that changed everything for you? How did it feel? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're rooting for Alex to take back control, hit that like button because this fight is far from over. The next morning, Alex woke to an eerie silence in the house. He had expected some form of retaliation from Nate and Emma, but what he saw when he walked downstairs made his blood run cold. In the dim light of the early morning, Emma sat in the corner of the living room, surrounded by an array of black crystals, humming softly as if she were conducting some sort of ritual. The air was thick with incense, its overpowering smell choking the space. She didn't acknowledge Alex as he walked past her. Her eyes closed in concentration, lost in her own world. But the scene was unsettling, even more so than the clutter and chaos that had been building up over the last few months. Meanwhile, Nate sat casually in the kitchen, as if everything was fine. He barely looked up from his phone when Alex entered, scrolling through whatever nonsense kept him distracted. "Hey man, you want to catch the game tonight?" Nate asked, as if their entire world hadn't just shifted. Alex stood still, his stomach turning. This was no longer just about a couple of freeloaders. This was about something deeper, something darker. His eyes scanned the space. The house was suffocating with their presence, their belongings, their influence. But as Alex surveyed the room, something else hit him. Something that made the blood drain from his face. The utility bills. They were due, and they hadn't paid a single one since moving in. No contributions. Nothing. Emma had made sure to take advantage of every free service, while Alex, the one who'd opened his home to them, was left holding the bag. He could feel the betrayal creeping in like a slow burn. But there was more. He walked into the hallway, noticing a pile of unopened mail stacked by the door. His mail. The mail that he had trusted would remain untouched. He pulled one letter from the stack, the envelope from his credit card company. It was then that he realized Emma had been going through his personal information, his financial details, and she hadn't even tried to hide it. "Emma," Alex said, his voice sharp, demanding her attention. "What the hell is going on? You've been going through my mail?" She opened her eyes, finally meeting his gaze. Her lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice calm and soothing. "I'm just helping you cleansing your energy, you know? It's important to let go of attachments." She gestured vaguely as if it all made sense in some twisted spiritual way. But Alex wasn't buying it anymore. His patience had worn thin. "And what about the bills, Emma? You and Nate haven't paid a single utility bill since you've been here. Do you even care that you've been using my stuff without a single contribution?" Nate, who had been silently watching the exchange, finally spoke up, his usual calm demeanor replaced with something more smug. "The universe provides, bro," he said with a casual shrug. "You know how it works, right? Money is just energy. It'll all work out." Alex felt his chest tighten. The audacity. The manipulation. This was no longer just about the small things, the rearranged furniture, the clutter. This was about something far more insidious. "You're running a business out of my house without telling me?" Alex's voice was steady, but his anger bubbled beneath the surface. Emma's smile faded, but she didn't look the least bit ashamed. "It's not a business, Alex. It's spiritual healing. People need this. I've been helping them, and you too. You should be grateful." Alex shook his head, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. They weren't just freeloading, they were exploiting him. Emma was charging clients hundreds of dollars for these healing sessions in his living room, turning his space into a private money-making operation. It wasn't just about space anymore. It was about fraud. Everything he had done for them, everything he had allowed, had been taken as an invitation to use him, to use his resources, his home, his kindness for their own gain. He had been manipulated, played like a fool, and the worst part was how they had made it feel like it was his fault. This was no longer just a matter of house guests overstaying their welcome. It was about fighting for control, fighting back against the people who had made him feel small. Before I tell you what Alex did next, how he finally decided to take action and expose the truth, I want to hear from you, my incredible viewers. Have you ever been in a situation where someone took advantage of your kindness? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you think Alex deserves to fight back, hit that like button because trust me, this is about to get a whole lot messy. Alex had tried to be patient. He had tried to make sense of everything, to hold on to the family he thought he was helping. But the reality was impossible to ignore now. When he walked into his living room that day, everything changed. The room had been transformed into something unrecognizable, a mock spiritual center, complete with black candles, strange symbols drawn on the floor, and an assortment of fake documents scattered on the coffee table. His heart raced as he took it all in. This wasn't just some misguided attempt at healing, this was a full-blown scam. It was the pile of forged contracts that made his blood run cold. Contracts that weren't even in his handwriting, but that were somehow linked to his name. They had been trying to manipulate him into signing away his house, turning it into some fake spiritual retreat. And Alex realized with a sickening clarity that he had been the mark in a long con they had been running from the very beginning. That was it. The breaking point. The moment of no return. His hands shook, but his mind was clear. It was time to stop being passive. It was time to take control. Alex grabbed his phone and made a call. The locksmith was on his way within the hour. The locks would be changed. This was his house, and they were not going to turn it into their playground any longer. But he didn't stop there. With the locks replaced, Alex did something bolder, something that sent a surge of power through him. He called the police. He wasn't going to let Nate and Emma walk away from this. Not after everything they had done. Not after how far they had taken this scam. The evidence was undeniable, and Alex wasn't about to let them destroy his life any longer. Within hours, the police arrived. Nate and Emma were taken away, their lives now in turmoil as their scams unraveled. The reality of their actions hit them hard, but Alex no longer felt sympathy. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. As they were escorted out of the house, Alex stood tall, his heart finally beginning to slow. He had done it. He had taken back control of his life. The house, his home, was once again his. And the weight that had been crushing him for months since the moment he had opened that door to help family finally lifted. It was a cathartic release. For the first time, Alex felt free. He looked around his home, taking in the familiar surroundings. No more crystals. No more fake spiritual nonsense. No more manipulation. It was over. Before I share the final twist, how everything ended and what happened to Nate and Emma, I want to connect with you, my incredible viewers. Have you ever taken a stand and fought back when everything seemed stacked against you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you've ever reclaimed your power from someone who tried to take it, hit that like button because Alex's victory is yours too.